Hey, Tim, it's great to see you again. And thanks for joining me on our Sustainability Square One series. And so let's get started. You and I met when you were working for a previous company. So why don't you give us a little bit about your background? How did you arrive here and what brought you into the world of sustainability?
Thanks for having me, Martha. So my first 10 years actually I spent in healthcare. I'm a software engineer and product person. Spent 10 years in health tech before I found the company Arcadia. So met with Kieran and Ryan, the two founders of Arcadia, and really learned that even somebody like me with a software background could actually have a pretty big impact in climate. So ended up leading product and engineering there for quite some time before then going to Inspire, which is a retail energy company that then got acquired by Shell. So spent a lot of time in climate and have just founded Scout, which is helping climate founders and other founders seek grant funding in a much easier and faster way.
Oh, cool. I'm sure that the political temperature in the U.S. Changing is going to change what you do for grants, but that we know that there's a lot of grant money out there. It's hard to navigate that space. One of the things that you didn't mention is your time at Instacart. And I think that's really critical for the future of clean energy and also carbon. So can you describe what you did there and how you think it relates to sustainability? And I'll ask my follow-up after.
Sure. So I think that's the other thing that a lot of companies don't realize is they can have a big impact on sustainability, even if that is not directly inherent to their core focus. So with Instacart, our goal was really to help deliver online groceries and make that faster and easier for folks. And so, one thing that we took a lot of pride in is that we can do that in more rural areas or food deserts or with an elderly population that maybe has disabilities or can't otherwise get to the store. So there's a lot of effort that we could put into there. And Instacart's actually taking this on directly. So they actually now have a head of sustainability within the company and their policy team. And so this is something that many companies, Figma is another one that has an employee resource group that also focuses a lot on sustainability. And so there's lots of different ways that people can have this impact and that companies can offer this as a benefit to their employees too.
Cool. So what I'm thinking is, GLYNT does a lot of emissions reporting and data preparation for companies. And in the new world, when we have the Trump administration come in, we're going to see a step back in enforcement of any sort of disclosure standards. The global markets and investors still require it, so companies that have global footprints will still do it. But I think the tenor, or to use an overused phrase, the vibe, shifts towards the consumer. Because in the global supply chain, after I make a chair that might be sitting in your backyard, it's up to you to use it and then dispose it. And we currently ask like Apple to report on cell phone charges as part of their sustainability reporting for all the cell phones that are currently in active use around the world. It is that kind of over usage reporting that shifts the burden over to consumers. How much are you using it? What are you doing at the end of life? And I think your experience in consumer engagement speaks to how do you get consumers to select products based on these attributes? If the underlying current's moving that direction, what is it that consumers will actually shop on?
Yeah, so I think consumers and then also state and local governments, I think we'll see a lot of that shift with the new shift at the federal level. And then we've already started to see like a lot of private sector investment into climate, in the results of the new election, because there's so many opportunities there. There's so many huge companies that have already made these commitments that are seeing the financial impact that they can provide. And so those things are already happening. And whether there's public dollars there or not, there will be dollars there no matter what. But then in the consumer side, again, I think there's lots of opportunity for education, honestly, more than anything else. People don't really understand what their carbon footprint means. They don't understand that what clean energy even means for their home. I mean, certainly it's easy to understand if I put solar on my roof, then I'm getting a lot of energy from the sun, but how much of that? An example that I tend to cite a lot is people have shifted a lot towards EVs, and EVs sound great. And I think there's this claim of there's no carbon emissions that come from the EV. It's not really true. If you have battery backups and solar and you're 100% reliant on those in your home, maybe that is true. But for most people, it's probably not. And when you're actually plugging into the wall, then you're pulling in power from the grid mix in your local and sort of environment. And so that could actually be powered by coal for instance, especially if you're living in West Virginia, where that's the predominant energy source in that grid. And so it's just, again, this awareness kind of thing of just, what does this actually mean for me? And I think that helps to then sort of cascade down the effects that consumers can adopt.
Yeah, I'd see that as well. And you're touching on something that is top of mind for me. So we've been working on data centers and electrification, such as EVs, pushing into the grid. And the grid doesn't move that fast, so it's hard to expand generation capacity. But we have surging AI demand, and that's more data centers. And so GLYNT is coming out with a white paper that shows our version of AI uses less energy and water because we use less data center resources per unit of functionality. And so that's great. But when we put it all together, I realized for all of our customers, maybe you use AI, maybe you don't, but you're on the other side of the equation here, folks, with rising electricity prices, and scarce water supplies per locale. This is probably going to be a top corporate issue in 2025. Thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely will be. And I think, one thing I've learned in my time in climate is that what does everybody in the world agree on? Not necessarily that they care as much about carbon emissions or, impact on the environment. There's a huge population that does. What everybody cares about is lowering their prices. And so as those prices start to soar, everybody, regardless of your political or otherwise background, will very much be invested in wanting to lower those prices and find opportunities and solutions. And the nice thing with that is those opportunities and solutions almost always mean more job creation in that local area as well. So lots of things that we're seeing, especially in recent weeks, with a shift from some DoD policies and DOE policies, is that nuclear is for the first time really being truly seen as a clean energy source. Maybe not renewable source, but it is a clean energy source. And so lots of investments, I would expect are going to happen in that sector, which will also then help to really meet the demand that AI will inevitably be bringing to the table.
Yeah. So as you know, GLYNT's in the part of the world of clean tech and sustainability that's called data, data, data. That's all we do. We're nuts about data, pulling it from here, preparing it, pushing it from there. So back to you. What's one thing that you have worked on in your career around data, and what do you see for the world of data next in sustainability, in this whole sustainability clean tech area?
I think it's just a huge industry. So Arcadia actually started off not as a data company, really started off as a renewable energy company and making that a commodity that any consumer could access. And it very quickly has shifted to what's now the ARC platform, which is a developer platform specifically to access utility data. GLYNT, of course, is also in a very similar space of them getting that data in the hands of companies that need it. And so I think with the advent and creation of all of these interested parties in the climate tech sector, those are all people that need to access this type of data. The data is hard to access. I mean, at Arcadia, we spent many hours building scrapers, web scrapers, things like that to access utility data because they don't have APIs. Utility API is another one that kind of exists in that space that's not grown as much, right? Because they're pretty limited in the amount of data they actually have. And so, I think really providing these types of platforms is then advancing the rest of these companies to move quickly. I really see GLYNT as the Stripe for clean companies that want to make an impact. And so, if everybody in the world who's building an e-commerce platform or fintech platform had to actually have to deal with PCI compliance and credit card processing, that would be a huge distraction from the core business that they're trying to create. And that's where I see GLYNT really fitting in. And a lot of these data companies is, we want the ability to access this data because it's necessary for what we're doing, but it's also not core to our mission at hand. And so, GLYNT is very similar actually to Scout in that way, right? Like you need funding to make your business operate, which is where we come in, but it shouldn't be where the founder spends 75% of their time. They should be focused on their mission at hand. And I think the same thing happens with GLYNT.
Yeah, very good. And we don't mind you mentioning competitors. We're out to, do head to head and beat them. But we also think the space is redefined by our financial grade, investor grade, SOX level type data and all the infrastructure around that. A closing question, as you look forward for Scout, there's probably many sustainability managers listening to this that would say, tell me what to do. are there going to be grants that would apply to me as a sustainability manager at a business? Any thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I think again, it's it's access to these different areas, right? So if I'm a sustainability manager and I want to say offer carbon offsets for my commuters that are coming into the office or flying out to our retreat, or I want to offer renewable energy credits to my employees at home, what are the two things that are top of mind? It's the sustainability impact, right? So offering 3-year-old Texas wind RECs to your employees, pretty low down on that list. But what's also super important to these companies is cost. And so those Texas wind RECs are super cheap. Buying a new SREC is going to be pretty expensive. And so with thousands of employees, that may just be out of budget, right? And so balancing those two things is really important. But it's a lot of work again for these sustainability managers to have the access to this data that they need. And so providing this into them really gives them the ability to kind of figure out what those levels are and create the best mix and package for their company.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And we look forward to chatting again. That closes up Sustainability Square One.